Okay, let's make a start. Hi everybody, my name is Kevin Arona from Oracle and welcome to a webinar on Oracle's world-class end-to-end planning and budgeting cloud service. This is the last instalment of our February webinar series and I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleague Stafford Burt, who will be covering the focus of this session, strategic workforce planning. If you have any questions or issues during the session, please feel free to post them using the chat facility in your remote WebEx session window, and I'll endeavour to answer them at the end of the session, else I'll reply via your registered email. The session will run till around 1 o'clock. There's lots to cover as we're going to recap, so let's make a fast start. Right, so going on to the objectives and outcomes of the session, and as usual we'll briefly replay our previous sessions. I'll have to do that at a fast pace because there's 3 sessions to cover. So forgive me for that. And then what we'll do is we'll just remind ourselves of the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud concept and focus the live demonstration on strategic workforce planning capabilities within the system, hopefully leaving you with a clear reminder as to where the overall service, including strategic workforce planning, can add value within your organisation. Okay, so a quick recap. Let's start off with some of the issues around planning and budgeting and maybe spreadsheets, or possibly you've got another system that hasn't been implemented quite as you wished. And really what we talked about in the previous session was using flat 2D spreadsheets linked with lots of formulas, maybe thousands of formulas, carrying a high risk for error, probably wasn't the best way to run a multi-million pound transactional budget. We mentioned that I wasn't a fan of Excel, and certainly within a single grid of data with maybe a couple of lookups and some ifs, they worked well, but possibly we needed lots of person power and time to make them work in an enterprise scenario. So audit and traceability, we mentioned, was very difficult with spreadsheets. Scenario planning, hard if not impossible when required. And I suppose what we really focused on was that those complex spreadsheets were often going to lead to a centralised budget, meaning devolvement out to the wider organisation, making the budgets and forecasts accessible to the end users was going to be very difficult, and essentially lead to the core problem of we weren't able to consolidate forecasts very quickly. So strategic decisions were taken often on a outdated set of data, and that was the key focus. So we suggested, what if we could maybe just take what we are doing now and elevate it onto the cloud into a fit for purpose 3D cube, meaning instant consolidation, trustworthy immediate reporting, real-time scenario planning, which we'll remind ourselves on, analysis on one robust accurate source of the truth, leading to clear correct decisions taken at a much earlier time in the planning cycle, and hopefully ultimately leading to better outcomes. What if we could take advantage of real in-use, out-of-the-box best practice templates deployed by thousands of global customers? Take advantage of those supportive inbuilt artificial intelligence. We'll remind ourselves of that and how that could help support our decisions, our planning decisions in the Oracle Cloud, and just stay ahead of the game, because when we're working with our cloud offering, we're going to be getting our monthly updates. We're going to be getting our updates far more frequently because they're monthly, rather than having to wait for a 4 or 5 year period where our system's out of date and we've got to have a long lead time before we realise the benefits. Akin, we suggested, to our mobile phone apps, keeping those up to date. So we could do away with the complex in-house spreadsheets, reducing the risk of the thousands of formulas, manual formulas, but also the individuals that look after those spreadsheets, the reliance and the risk on those individuals, whereby actually we've got a proven system that globally serves thousands of customers instead, all leading to the ability for easy self-service access. So allowing the budget holders to be able to access the system in a nice, simple way, self-service potentially if you're ready for that step. So the planning cloud can take that cultural journey with you, and hopefully allowing the budget holders to be more connected, feel connected with those finance decisions, feel responsible for those finance decisions, and see the finance department more as business partners rather than a service to hand off to and rely upon. So we covered that, and then we went on to just remind ourselves of what the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud looked like, and we had this simple diagram just at the bottom right that explains it quite succinctly. Here are 3D cubes of data, our fit for purpose 3D cubes of data, almost like a Rubik's cube, able to slice and dice our information very easily. We needed to load the data. We needed to load the cubes, the planning cubes, with some data, and often we would link that directly to our ERP system. And if that was an Oracle ERP system, that would be an out-of-the-box connection. If it wasn't, it'd be a very simple case of mapping across the relevant fields. Once we've got that information in the system, we might want some supportive statistical information such as HR or payroll data, maybe adult social care data, housing information to support those balances, and maybe provide some more information but go on to potentially drive calculations and forecasts, enabling you to take advantage of activity-based forecasting. We've got the users here on the left hand side interacting with that data, and we've got the security of the hierarchy within the system, so the users will only be able to see the relevant cost center information that they've got access to, so making that very easy to do. The users can interact with the information, update forecasts, and they can approve those budgets using the inbuilt workflow. And once the information has been approved, the plans have been approved, then you're immediately able to report out of the system using the inbuilt reporting and analytics capability. Just to notice this red dotted line here, so if users are in the system, they're looking at balances, they are able to initiate a drill down capability to maybe go back down to the ERP system, the source system, and interrogate the transactional information that makes up those balances, so they can start self-serving some of those questions that they might be pushing onto finance at the moment. Okay, so hopefully that's given you just a quick refresher as to how the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud service sits. Recapping on the actual system itself, let's just remind ourselves. So if I dive into the system once again and just quickly go through the steps of our standard demo, including activity-based budgeting and scenario planning. So I shall log in there, and we presented with a landing page. I was the administrator, so I had lots of icons on my system, but that could be reduced depending on your roles and responsibilities. I would generally look at the task that I had to undertake for that particular day, looking at the instructions potentially. Maybe I had to prepare a medium-term financial plan, update a forecast. That would be my latest task for the day. And then we went into the task card, which gave us a bit more opportunity to navigate through the other parts of the system, not just the medium-term financial plan, but the annual budget, the in-year monitoring, and the reporting side of things. Looking at the MTFS, that's what we focused in on. We were looking to prepare our medium-term financial plan. I've got a clear list of instructions as an end user as to what I need to undertake. I've got instructions that can make that even clearer. That could be a hyperlink, a Word document, and the idea is I would go through my tasks, and at the end of the exercise, whether that be a medium-term financial plan or updating a monthly forecast, I could submit that for approval right at the end of my task list. I can keep track of this, so if I go into the instructions, for example, if I've read those instructions, I can check the or tick the checkbox here, and when I click next, I go on to the next task in the list, and I carry on with what I need to do, and then complete that particular checkbox. And when I close out, when I press the refresh button back on the task list, I can see that traffic light option has turned green, so I can track where I am in the budget, and will help managers and administrators make sure that that planning cycle is completed in an allotted amount of time. We focused in on the prepare baseline option. This is where we're preparing our medium-term forecast. I'll just clear that baseline so we've got a clear starting position. And we suggested just using a very simple form that I was looking at the finance cost center. I had some account codes on the left hand side, and I needed to prepare a medium-term financial plan. Now this budget here looks very simple, but it's made up of many segments, as you can see here, and I could present this to the end user in as detailed view as I wanted, or a summarized a collapsed view if required. So I've got the makeup of the budget. I've also got my calendar here, where I can break out into quarters, into periods if I need to. So previous year's data, and also we had the ability to create 3 future high-level strategic financial plans. And we can simply enter data into this if we need to. Enter in a number. That's of course you can do that. But what we looked at was the fact that we could create business rules that an end user could invoke very, very easily. Just by a right click of a button, I could decide that I want a nice clear start point. So maybe I want to seed my baseline with the previous year's figures, and I could invoke that rule just by launching it, as you can see there, and that will give me a start point of last year's figures, which is nice and easy to invoke. You can see here that my last year's figures 410 doesn't quite match up to my current year figures, and that's because in my rules I've got things like, do I want to pick up the recurring environment? So in the rules I can put if statements in to make sure that those only the recurring environments are passed across and the non-recurring environments aren't. So that could be expanded as you wish. Of course, if I do update any numbers, then I've got a full audit trail. That's going to be a key benefit, so I can right click and look at the change history and see who's updated that figure, when they've updated it and why. I can also add comments very easily, so adding comments is something that can be done to any cell at a high level or at a bottom level. So if I just put in a test comment in there, for example, as I go on to have a conversation, maybe other users are accessing the system, you can see that I'm starting to build up a conversation and I can get an audit trail. I can report on these comments, so when I produce my final reports, my commentary will be sourced from the same database that the balances and the forecasts are saved in. When I press save, these numbers are instantly consolidated, so that's the beauty. I haven't got numerous spreadsheets around the organisation and having to have that consolidated. I can instantly see that top level position. We mentioned how we didn't have to update numbers at the bottom level account codes. I could click on this summary number, total expenditure, click on this data shortcut wizard. It's got lots of helpful tools like cut and paste, but also things like allocate and spread, where I can take that number and maybe reduce it by 10% for supplies and services, or maybe this is all my telephone costs for the entire company. I want to model what that reduction looks like and maybe spread that reduction across all my account codes proportionally as per the numbers that are in there already, or maybe relationally as per last year's actuals or budget. Possibly even split it, or maybe just fill it in with a particular number. So nice and quick to be able to mass allocate top-down budget across all the relevant accounts and cost centres that you want to look at. I've got filters in here as well, so I can filter, maybe look at greater than, anything over £200,000. So yeah, nice and easy for me to be able to very quickly and accurately get a robust forecast or plan into my system. We looked at activity-based budgeting as well, and we suggested, that is a commonly used technique in the public sector and the private, more so in the private sector, in the bigger, larger companies. In the public sector, it's just starting to expand. Certainly in the payroll side of it, we're looking at the detail, but maybe not in other parts of the system quite yet. And we're looking to look at the individual key activities, the drivers behind the balances that we see on screen now. And often, getting that detail together and getting it to marry up was a labour-intensive task. Did it add a material benefit? Possibly. Did we have the tools to be able to do it? Maybe not. If we were using Excel, that was often going to be very difficult. With a system like this, we can have directly linked data sets. So if I right click on the employee cost, for example, and I fire up my linked review employees linked sheet, I can see that I've got the detail of the latest payroll import, whether that be monthly because I'm forecasting on the monthly cycle, or whether that be yearly because I'm about to start my annual budget and I want the latest position. I'm then able to interact with this. So for example, if I click down on Kevin Richardson here, I've got a list of different grades, and that when I select that grade, that will then invoke the relevant salary, NI bandings. I can have all my assumptions in here like pension rates, pay uplifts, and the idea is that when I have finished modelling my payroll assumptions, whether they're on leave or for a particular month, I can add in hires, transfer hires. When I press save, that information is automatically rolled up and directly linked to that balance. So I can report on both sides. There isn't any ambiguity. There's full transparency through the detailed data sets. We also had a quick view on adult social care. as well. I'm going to go into that just in a second, because I've got my scenario planning demonstration around that, so we'll look at how the detail sits behind that in a second. But what we also reviewed was the property repairs and maintenance, and this really wasn't about activity-based budgeting so much, but the demonstration here was a very simple activity detail, such as the number of properties and property value, but it was to show off the artificial intelligence capabilities, the predictive planning capabilities that are inbuilt with the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud. This comes with the system. You switch it on. It's got some very simple options for you to be able to select in the settings, and then you can invoke this at any point in time. So if I right click on any data field, invoke the predictive planning capabilities, what it will do is it will look at all the historic information that's relevant in the system to this particular grid of data, and it will provide me a prediction using methods that are currently used in the private sector by the likes of Sainsbury's, Tesco's, that are modelling their ice cream sales for the future. Examples like that. So at the moment, this can sit at the bottom of my screen and just give me guidance as to where my forecast might be going awry. Might not necessarily be right, but it's certainly going to be something for to give me an indicator. So what is this telling me? This green line here is all the historic information in the system. It's smoothed out a couple of outliners here, as you can see. My current forecast is this red line here, but the system is predicting that it will be much higher. And what I mean, I can look at the details of how it's come to that prediction. It's using regression techniques, as I say, established in the private sector, Samira and Amira, using seasonality, and I can interact with this prediction. So for example, if I fire up my options, I might want to add in a best case and worst case, maybe my own growth curve at 2% or whatever percentage I want to model at. I can do that, and when I press apply, that then applies that to my prediction. I can see how that looks. There's my best case at the top, being the top orange line here, and my worst case, of which my forecast is very near. And you can see that the traffic light is suggesting that I am highly likely to be under forecasting, and maybe I want to have a look at my numbers. So that could be enough for me. I might want to maybe just bring that that particular best case down. I might want to take my particular forecast here and maybe just uplift that particular month on the graph, and then what that gives me the ability to do is use this paste button to say, well, actually the prediction is probably right here. Let me go and use that as a start point, so I can paste that prediction onto my plan, and notice the lines then join up. It moves up, and my prediction is now in line with the system. My risk comes all the way down, and I've got the ability to now go into the data sets, maybe update a few local adjustments, and then right click, add some comments as to why I think those adjustments are away from the system. So yeah, very powerful tool, and as I say, can be used across the system. So as I click back onto the balances, that prediction is always running in the background and looking at the historic data set. So a nice tool to be able to invoke in the system. Okay, so that was predictive planning. We then moved on to scenario planning, and if I just close out of this baseline here, looking at adult social care, which was part of the activity detail that we were talking about, I've got this adult social care modelling master that allows me to demonstrate the core part of scenario planning. The last session we did, session 3, which you can pick up via a video link, does have more detail on lots of other scenario planning options, but this was the core option. We had adult social care system detail, maybe Liquid Logic or like systems like that have been loaded directly into the system here, allowing me to model at a very detailed level. I've got the ability to roll up that information by care type, the number of applications, the savings that were over 40 or below £14,000 for those applications, and the sliding scales, how much those user contributions are, or the percentages off as well. And I've also overlaid the population metrics. How is that going to increase in this particular scenario, and using those tariffs, the adult social care tariffs here, and population needs, percentage of the population that are going to require adult social care that has been built up through my detail. I'm able to not only come up with a static number as to what that total social care cost should be, and maybe the council apportionment, but also model. So I've got a worst case here as well. Got a worst case scenario where my population needs are slightly higher in January, February and March of the current year, maybe a best case as well. And I can fire these scenarios up very quickly. Now if I want to compare these scenarios, I can just click on the next button, and I've built in a comparison form that allows me to compare those scenarios. As you can see, best case, worst case, baseline, so that's the baseline, and I've got some averages here, the average age of social care person that we're looking after, the cost per week, and the numbers here in front of me, maybe a value indicator where I'm over and above. If I go back to my scenario option, or my modelling master, if I want to fire up another scenario, very easy to do that. So I'm going to fire that up from my baseline, click on the plus button here, maybe create a moderate scenario. That will copy across my baseline to moderate, and it gives me the option then, let's go with the population overlay, gives me the option then to interact with the numbers. And as soon as I press save, so let's go with 15% on that, pretty high I suppose. But if as soon as I press save, what happens is that's immediately added to my my comparison form, so I'll be able to visualize that immediately. When I add my scenario, I can delete scenarios, I can manage those scenarios as an administrator. And one other thing is, if you've got lots of spreadsheets with lots of scenarios in, very difficult to consolidate, very easy with the Planning and Budgeting Cloud to do that. So if I take the worst case, for example, I can publish that worst case sandbox to the baseline, and that gets rid of that particular scenario and then overlays that to the baseline. So very quick and easy to compare scenarios and then fire that across to your master plan. You can do detailed scenarios, so if I was to, for example, filter on my statistics here and say let's take everybody who was let's say over let's go with greater than 50 years of age, maybe their cost is over £200 a week, and then maybe uplift that by 10%. You know, I can also carry out a very discrete scenario. Okay, a couple more minutes on recapping here. That was scenario planning. We then quickly looked at the annual budget, and you know, we didn't go into that in very much detail. All of the concepts I talked about in terms of updating the budgets, the plans, could be carried across to any planning cycle, whether that be the budgets or the forecasts. So here we just looked at profiling the budget. Very easy to do that. We could use drop downs to do a seasonal spread, or maybe just interact with a final year position and have that proportionally spread across the season. So we mentioned that. We also suggested that we could drop any of these numbers, and it could be any of these numbers into what's called Smart View. So just to re-mention that, if I go to my establishment form, this could be done on any form. If I go to actions, you can drop any of these numbers into an Excel spreadsheet, but we in the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud, we certainly we go a step further by using Smart View, and I'll just give you a very quick view of this. Just to remind you, what it will do is fire up Microsoft Excel. In this particular case, this could be used in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint or Outlook. And I do have to log in as it's requiring me to access the cloud database. So even though I'm working in the familiar interface of Microsoft Excel, if I make an update here, for example, let's say we change Kimberly to a receptionist and then press the submit button, that is immediately updated in the web view. So when I refresh that, you'll notice that that's immediately updated. So, you know, we're accessing the same cloud interface. The web interface is great for the end users, but if the accountants prefer to use Excel, we have got that ability, taking away all the Excel misnomers. Okay, just finishing up here on my recap, we looked at forecasting, which was a similar thought process. In forecasting, we might want to review a position first of all for forecasting. Where are we in this month's forecast? So that might be a dashboard that could give us the ability to interact and have a look at trend analysis, maybe focusing on the variances that we weren't doing so well in. Could be interactive, head counts as well. Environments are supported, and also the ability to approve the ability to approve these budgets. So for example, once I'd finished my medium-term financial plan or forecast, if I press the approve button, I've got the ability to approve my my budgets. Let's make sure I get that right. I've got the ability to then submit those budgets for approval, and have the workflow then make sure that those budgets and forecasts are approved in a timely manner. So here I'm submitting, I'm promoting my budgets, I'm rejecting my budgets, all the way up the hierarchy as far as you need it to happen. I can understand where I am in the approval chain and who the end approver is. So useful to have that overlaid over your plans. And just on the reporting side, to finish up on, once I have created those plans and finalised those plans, excuse me, my reporting is instant. I can report at any point in time, whether that be during the planning cycle, at the end of the planning cycle, and produce my corporate reports. This is a web report writer that's inbuilt in the system, so you can create your pixel perfect reports. If you're not quite ready for self-service, you can burst these reports out to email addresses, so the budget holders will get a hard copy. So reporting was where I finished up on, and taking that just to the end game, where you may want to think about reporting in a regulatory manner. You can do that. My Windows machine here is just stalling a bit. It's working on something. You can create a Word document, an Excel document. So for your regulatory reports, like your RO returns or your annual reports, you'll be able to create those in Word and just refresh those documents directly in Word and Excel using the Smart View plugin. So if you've got your format, you're able to just refresh that information directly into those Word documents. Excuse me. We mentioned that we've got the enterprise version of this software that comes with pre-packaged reports, dashboards, web forms, focused in on the financials, which we've seen a little bit of today, workforce as well, the capital side, so creating new capital projects and monitoring existing, creating new projects as well, and these particular frameworks are all linked together. So in a project, if I was creating a new project, I could draw in workforce requirements, I could draw in assets as well, and when I created those projects, those numbers could go back to the financials. So as an end user, I'm looking at the activity, and the system is creating the numbers for me. It's drawing out the financials using the calculations inbuilt. So a couple of examples of capitals and projects. This was covered in far more detail in the previous session, so just refreshing your memory there. We talked about performance reporting, where those final reports are not just created in a Word document, they are actually created in the performance reporting module, where one individual could be creating the executive summary, one individual could be creating the main body, and that could be agreed in the system. And we looked at the analytics cloud, which was an option that sat on top of the planning cloud, could take the planning cloud data and any other data source, maybe a housing data, and rather than having to load it into the planning cloud for your month-on-month forecasting for your budget preparation, maybe you just wanted to mash up some data, have a look at some relationships. You could link data at a click of a button, and we looked at a couple of apps. Please have a look at these in the previous sessions that allows you to get to that information really easily using a mobile application, and also some really clever things like being able to drag and drop correlated information and narrative be automatically created using the artificial intelligence as a start point. So you'll now show reports being automatically generated. Okay, so that was a quick recap. Just as a reminder, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Stafford Burt, who's going to cover off strategic workforce planning now to really close the loop on the payroll side, the HR side of our particular solution. So bear with me here. Let me just pass the session over. So I'm going to stop sharing my particular screen, and I'm going to pass over to Stafford. Okay. Okay. Hopefully you can see Stafford's screen.
Hi everybody. So I'm going to, in the next 15 minutes or so, run through some of the basics really around the strategic workforce planning tool, which is a part of the enterprise tool we've just been looking at. Pretty much all of the functionality that Kevin's been discussing is available in this tool as well. So the ability to bring in the artificial intelligence information, the ability to do all the predictive modelling, those kind of things are all available within there. I'm going to really focus on the two sides that we typically work on in strategic workforce planning, and I often explain to HR people and to finance people that the idea of strategic workforce planning is to allow the HR function to speak finance, We tend in HR to deal with things in a certain way and create budgets in a certain way and plan things in a certain way that our finance colleagues don't always necessarily understand. The idea of this is to allow me to interpret that information into a way that we can all work on common ground with, share that information across into my project planning, for example, into my other budget planning and into my compensation planning. So fundamentally, strategic workforce planning is about balancing up your current supply of people, your current supply of skills, and your future demand for those skills. And then that allows us then clearly to do a gap analysis of what the supply-demand gap is and start to think about how we assess that. And if we take that further, that can also move us to the nirvana for the strategic workforce planner, which is to say, not so much how many heads do I need here or how many full-time equivalencies or how many hours are needed here, but which skill is needed here. So that's where the skills assessment comes in. The first component of this is actually understanding what we currently have around our HR information. So I'm able to import my HR data, and I can see on my current plan, I'm looking at people across my different job types, my role types. So I can see that I've got a number of directors, a number of generalists, a number of specialists, a number of analysts. The model I'm looking at the moment, the scenario I'm running is around manning my service desk internally to make sure I've got sufficient people to do that. But clearly, just as we were discussing before, there can be a roll-up around this. So my individual functional managers can do their own sub-budgets and roll those up, or I can indeed set the budget at a higher level and cascade it down my entities should I choose to. I'm also, in this case, looking at my current year on here, but I can move that forward. And just as in the other scenarios we've seen, I can have multiple versions of these. I can make comparisons across them, so I can do a worst case, best case, etc. So I'm currently looking at the data I've extracted, and I can go and see what that information is, what's come out of my HR data, so I can see my employee information. And I can bring through in this level just some very basic compensation information, because really what I want to start to understand is what's my salary load, my on-cost load going to look like in the future as we go forward. And we can see that at the moment I've got a fairly flat set of compensation information in here. But just as we did before, I could spread a 1% rise year on year over the years, just using the same tools we've seen previously. So that gives me an idea of what my current situation is. So we can use that then to drive the supply side. So the supply side of strategic workforce planning allows me to say, that's my current information. What's going to happen to my workforce over the next 4 to 5 years? Where are we going to go to? What's going to drive attrition? So I've said for my staffing budget in this case that one of the key drivers of attrition I want to look at is attrition by job. But clearly I also want to examine attrition by age and those kind of items as well, so I can manage both, and indeed attrition by any other route that I like to do. Clearly one of the key drivers for attrition by age is people's retirement ages. So it's one of the critical issues that most public organisations have today in Europe, is that our workforce is ageing. We have a large number of them about to retire, and clearly I can put in some retirement age information prediction. I can take that much further, and I can start to look at attrition data by age bands. We typically think that we're going to turn over more staff in the retirement phase, in this phase from 60 to 56 onwards, and we typically, if you ask a bunch of HR people, they'll tell you that all of my millennials are going to change their jobs 5 times a month. Actually, we want to do that on fact-based information, not on guesswork. And again, this is where that data extraction from HR, the use of the artificial intelligence to understand attrition, actually shows me that my millennials are probably not going to be changing jobs quite as quickly as we think. The graph of attrition by age is actually a little bit more of a hockey stick rather than a U-shaped. But I can do that. I can also then look at attrition by job types. So typically we see, for example, we understand in many city locations that attrition for social care workers is higher than, for example, payroll experts. So I can build all of that kind of information in as well. What that then does is lets me see what my supply headcount and my supply FTE is going to look like over time. So I've got my current data, and I can see how my workforce is going to decay over time. I'm going to lose staff because people are leaving. I'm not taking any account here of recruitment or anything like that. This is just, if we did nothing, what's my workforce going to look like in 4 years' time? And clearly, as a component of that, I want to look at what my salary burden is likely to look at in that time period as well. So actually, because we're not bringing in new staff, even though we might be saying our compensation is going to increase, because the staffing number decreases, you see my salary bills are dropping as well. So that allows me to understand the supply side, and typically that's very, very fact-based. We have a set of HR data. We make some assumptions about turnover, but we can use some very powerful tools that we already have to look at historically what our turnover is in certain areas and base that on factual information. When we move on to the demand side, we're really then moving into the more dark art around the planning component around human resources and skills in particular. So what I've got at the moment is I'm looking at a model which is showing me, again for my help desk function, what my demand for my different job roles is going to be in FY19, FY20, FY21 and FY22. And we're going to come on in a moment and see where this data has been derived from, how it's come from there, but that's giving me a summary of what I've got. What we say first of all is I want to look at my specific job roles and I want to understand what drives the number of staff I need in a certain area. So in this case, if I'm looking at my help desk function, my generalists on the help desk, the number of people I need is driven by the number of calls I need to service. But this might be the number of social workers I have being driven by the number of people in an age bracket I have, or the number of children who need to be in care. This might be the number of people working in a care home driven by the population of that care home. This could be the number of procurement staff I have based on how many procurement line items I raise, whatever that might be. So we have demand driver, and this is where the understanding of HR of the business is critical, because this is saying what drives the demand for different job roles. So in this case, my HR generalist is driven by the number of calls on the help desk. If I increase the number of calls, that increases the number of HR generalists I have. And I've said in my case, the number of managers that I have is then based on how many people I have. So as the call goes up, the calls go up, the number of HR generalists goes up, and that increases the number of managers that I might need, because the demand driver for the manager is my regional headcount. So as I increase headcount in one area, it goes up. One of the things we might be doing is driving recruitment, because obviously we increase our headcount. The increase in headcount might tell me how many new recruiters I need. So that has a different driver for a different job role. So I can have multiple drivers. And what I like to do typically is, if I'm doing particularly this from a bottom-up point of view, I want my individual service managers to not be able to affect which of the drivers are driving their staff. That's my HR expertise. But I want to feed things like the number of calls from that. So if I come back up and start to look then at my demand driver data, this is looking for each of those demand drivers, number of calls for example, what that data is going to be based on. And this is coming from a whole variety of places. I've got a whole series of ratios I can build into here. And again, I've got all of those tools around the data spreading and the data mapping. But let's say, for example, we understand that there's going to be some new legislation introduced in FY19 around maternity leave. And that we estimate is going to increase the number of calls coming into my help desk significantly. So I, as the individual service manager, can come in and say the number of calls I'm expecting is going to peak. Because the number of calls is going to peak, potentially that can increase the headcount that I'm in there. The ideal place we want to get to is to understand which of the 4 Bs in workforce planning we should be employing to cover that. So traditionally what's happened is we've increased that number of calls. We need a whole new set of people on the help desk. So we're going to use the first B, which is to buy skills, which is to go out and do a whole lot of recruiting or bring in contractors and increase my cost burden by doing that. The second B I might use to cope with that is that I might want to build additional skills. So there might be more junior staff who I can train to handle that call, or it might be I have staff who I'm redeploying internally and I'm going to retrain. So that's the second B, which is to build the skills. I may be borrowing the skills. I talk to a lot of large civil service organisations who cover the entirety of the UK, and they will discuss, could we divert skills from Leicester to Coventry to cover this for a short period of time? So that's that borrow the skills. And the final fourth B is the modern one, which actually is to think about, might I bot those skills? Is there something I could do with a piece of technology which would increase our reach? So increasing the number of calls in there, if I had a nice new CRM system, for example, that might lower down the amount of time that my staff take on their calls. So I can affect my demand driver. I can come in and I can look at the demand driver by the specific job entities that I have and see how they work. And for example, if I was going to bot this and make myself more efficient, I might say that I have a demand scale of 10%. Let's say that my new CRM system is going to make us 30% more efficient. Yeah, so I'm going to increase my efficiency from 10 to 30. I can then come in, I can add that piece of information in and change that rating up, and I've moved it to 3,000 instead of 30, so that's become really, really efficient, hasn't it? So that's just a decimal point. And I can start to build that in again, work that into my plan and move forward. What that then gives me is obviously then a view of what my current requirements are, what the headcount requirement of my different job roles is going to be going forward, and then also what the headcount cost is going to be for that. Because clearly I've now said I might be increasing the number of staff I have in certain areas, my headcount cost and my compensation cost is going to rise as a result. So we looked at our HR data and we looked how we might decay that through attrition in my supply side. I've looked at the demand side, which is coping with, what might be coming up in the future, building in scenarios to say, well, is EU exit going to increase the requirement in this area or that area? How am I going to deal around that? So what I ideally get to then, once I understand those two sides, is to look at my gap analysis. And as we can clearly see, I put that supply number up rather large, and I can see that my demand is vastly outstripping my supply. So I have a clear issue here. I'm going to have a whole number of calls coming into my help desk which I'm not going to be able to handle, or I've got a whole lot of children requiring additional social care who are not going to be helped. I've got a whole lot of staff raising procurement who are not going to be helped because of X, Y, and Z factors. So what I want to then think about is how I'm going to close that gap up, and that's where we start to move into the art on this as well. But I can then see, what that looks like over time. I can scroll across and see my times on there. I can look at my variance over time in a difficult route as well if I like. I can then see how that looks in terms of actual headcount over time. And I can move into my gap closing scenario. So I might say, well, let's say, for example, we are going to bring in a number of people. We're going to do some recruiting. We're going to transfer people in, transfer people out. We're going to come in and look at all the different routes that I might do. I've got a number of things built in here. I might do a university recruiting tool. I might go and bring in some contingent labour. I might be acquiring some labour. We may have some staff being 2P'd in. And I can build in a whole vast array of different strategies to examine how I'm going to close that supply-demand gap. And I'm using my Mac incorrectly and shifting over screens too rapidly there. The other thing that then drives for me is if I understand the skills that my staff currently have, and I can start to understand what the future skills profile for my different job roles looks like, I can start to move and look at a skills assessment and start to say, actually, let's just not think about my salary cost and my headcount variance, but actually what skills are we going to need? So I can see, for example, on this pie chart over here, as an HR person, I always look at these spider diagrams, and I'm used to seeing what a person's skill is compared to their job, what their requirement is, and looking at gaps. This is actually saying to me, these are my skill requirements for the current year that I'm in, and these are my skill requirements in the future, driven by demand, but also driven by changes in my jobs as people go forward, because there might be new technology, new things they need to understand. So I can see, for example, on my team working skill, I'm pretty much there. I'm not overly worried about that. But initiative, I clearly have a gap around that I need to think about. So that's starting to say to me in my learning and development function, do we need to scale up our training in that area? Do we need to change our recruitment practice to find people with more of that kind of skill? What do we need to do to change that gap? The graph over on the other side gives me a different way to look at that. If you imagine a line going from 0 to the top right, anything above the line and to the left of it is a problem. Anything below the line to the right I'm fairly happy on. So again, I can see I've got a major outlier here on risk taking. I haven't got sufficient of that skill to meet my demand in the future. Likewise, my innovative thinking. But my team working skill, I'm pretty happy on. I know we're there on that. So that's all coming through from what skills I've currently got, what the job roles might look like in the future, and then what my demand scales are going to be. And I can then start to categorise those out. Typically, I see people going away and trying to boil the ocean with this and go away and do this over 100 different competencies in 1,000 different departments and not getting anywhere because they spend all their time doing data analysis. One of the things we can do is group my skills together so I can actually see that my people motivation is where I'm going to have some issues in my project management skill sets. So I can take this to a much higher level than looking at the individual competencies and skills that staff have, and actually make a good start on my planning around those skills as we go forward. So, we extracted data from our HR system. We looked at how that supply might change over time. We built up information on what our demand drivers might be and looked at what that driver data might be. We used that to give us a gap analysis and start to examine some of the gap closing scenarios. And finally, if we needed to, we've used that as a skills assessment to start to say to my learning development function, we need to do this, to my recruiting function, we need to do that. Very, very, very high level overview of strategic workforce planning. There are hundreds of different scenarios you can build into this. Obviously the management of the process for the top-down or bottom-up budgeting, as we saw before, is available as well, and all of the tools that Kevin was showing you before are available across this as well for all of those artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of planning functions I want to build in. So I'm going to hand you back over to Kevin now. So if I can remember how to do this, so if I do stop sharing, then I should be able to make Kevin the presenter again. So change role to presenter.
Great, thanks very much for that, Stafford. Excellent. Really progressing on from the employee payroll modelling that we looked at in the financial side, the typical payroll type modelling that we would do in the public sector, and actually drilling down further and looking at the activity, joining up the activity, and then generating those future numbers that can be drawn back into the medium-term financial plan. So yeah, fantastic to see how that can really provide more information and accurate forecasts and plans. I'm going to wrap up now. We're coming up to the end of the session, and just to replay some of the exciting upcoming developments in the planning and budgeting cloud. We talked about the intelligent performance management option that's going to take the artificial intelligence that you've seen in the demonstration to the next level. It's going to be running under the bonnet all the time, and it's going to start surfacing some of the correlations, some of the variances directly to the end user. So we're not having to go away and analyse and research ourselves. The system is not just is providing that to us, but it's also providing us solutions. So it will go on to provide you a solution, an automatically generated forecast of which you can optionally take or adjust. So yeah, a really exciting development there. Also, going on from the mobile inquiry tool that we've seen, we've actually got a tool in the offering that's going to be it's going to take the intelligence of that further, whereby you can interact with a bot that will, you can not only ask it questions such as show me my sales, show me my expenditure, but also think about updating a plan on the go, and that's all tying up with being able to more readily and frequently update your forecasts on the go. So if something changes on the ground in your particular department, you can immediately update the forecast, allowing strategic managers to be instantly made aware of that particular change so they can take the necessary action. Without this particular approach, this making it instant, or even just the web interface, that strategic manager is going to certainly find out about that particular change a lot later in the planning cycle. So some exciting developments coming up. Our usual summary slide here, just to remind us of the whole session, but also the whole series in general. Replay some of that value messaging about the planning and budgeting cloud. Hopefully, we've reminded you of the flexibility, the power and the tools that are provided as standard in the service that can be quickly established in the cloud. Very quickly spun up. This is not something that you're going to have to take 6 months to get up and running. With the power of the cloud, we're looking to replicate a service, get that spun up in 4 to 6 weeks in terms of one particular model, and really that's where I wanted to try and finish up on. It was just looking at the cloud in general and our customer connect service. And this is where I think the cloud really comes into its own. It's not just about saving money on or resource on infrastructure, not having to buy the servers, not having to have the internal resource to manage those servers, but really it's about customers joining a community, a very similar cloud service, and sharing those ideas. And with our customer connect solution, yourselves and Oracle can contribute to not just only feeding in updates and recommendation, but also artifacts. So things like dashboards, web forms that you've created, you can share amongst yourselves and download and upload. Very similar to your mobile phone app. So that's the real power of the cloud, is being able to connect in that community. And just to remind you of that particular the community that you'll be joining in terms of Oracle, the stature that you'll be joining. I'm sure everybody's heard of on this call heard of the advisor Gartner, world-renowned global research company in IT, finance, HR, and more. And according to them, Oracle are consistently the outright leader in the cloud financials planning analysis solution space, demonstrated in terms of its innovative product strategy and also its business model and market traction. So you'll be joining a fantastic community in terms of that particular cloud service. And we did mention some of the ROI statistics, very high level, based on internal information and some of the experience that we've got within the organisation. It's something we can certainly work with you on, but just some of the high level metrics here. This is just on the budget preparation side here, but on the forecasting side, it really comes to life. It becomes incredibly compelling in terms of some of the conservative measures we've put in here. 0.01% in terms of making the information more visible and identifying savings, not 1%, but really reduce that. And we've not even factored in the infrastructure savings in terms of not having to host this on premise or have the internal skills to be able to manage this on premise. So pretty compelling figures here, and happy to work with you if you want to maybe make this your own in terms of identifying any savings. Okay, well that brings the whole February planning and budgeting cloud series to a close. It's been 4 sessions. I hope you've enjoyed the sessions and you've really become familiar now, I suppose, with what we're offering currently. And you can clearly see where the Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud can add value in what you're doing in your planning cycles. So, taking into account what we've seen, lots of powerful features. I'd really encourage you, as usual, to contact your account manager and just explore some of the costing. I think you'll be surprised at the value statement here. With the cloud offering, the user subscriptions are far lower than you might expect, and it might be worth just exploring what that looks like in the total cost of ownership terms. So feel free to contact your account manager or myself. I've got my email address here. Do fire any questions to me. Have we got any questions on the chat facility in WebEx? I haven't at the moment, so do email those across if you need to. I'm going to bring this webinar to a close and the whole series to a close. Thanks a lot for attending, and that's the end of the session.